Hi, hello everybody. Final session for Thursday in La Cave. The topic is Beyond Ink and Paper, software tools for monitoring and enforcing privacy and data protection laws. A very exciting topic because we've heard a lot about the laws and the regulations, the principles, how to apply it, how to, enforce it, implement it. But what about monitoring? How do we make sure that it actually works, that it's supposed to do what it's supposed to do? For that, it is my honor to have these distinguished panelists here. So my name is Marc Vael. I am the chair for this session. I am president of ISACA Belgium. I'm also currently deputy member of the Flemish Data Protection Supervisory Authority in Belgium. And I teach at the Antwerp Management School and Solvay Brussels School. And I also was a DPO long before it had a name like that in a company. Today, the moderator will be Nikolaos Laoutaris. He's a senior researcher for Telefonica in Barcelona, very nice city, and the smart city of the world, as I remember. And he's working for Data Transparency Lab. He has a PhD in computer science from the University of Athens. And I will go through the panelists in alphabetical order. First of all, Krishna Gummadi. He's a research group leader for the Max Planck Institute for Software Systems in Saarbrücken, Germany. And he has a PhD also in computer science of the University of Washington. Also, we have Haddadi, who is a lecturer in digital media at the Queen Mary University of London. And he is also an information services director for ACM SIGCOM Executive Committee. And then two ladies in the panel, Karolina, Mojzesowicz, approximately, head of sector data protection reform at the European Commission here in Brussels. Very honored to have you here on the panel as well. She has a doctorate in law from the European University at Viadrina, and she has a master law at the University of Maastricht. And finally, but not least, we have Cathy O'Neill. She's an author of a blog called mathbabe.org. She's living in the US. She has a PhD of Harvard. Always very nice to meet PhDs in Harvard. But she calls herself a math and a data nerd, or a data scientist. So we have here a real data scientist in the room, which is always very good. Without further ado, I give the floor to the chair, to the moderator, for the more information.
Thank you very much, Marc. Or should I speak here? Okay. Hello everyone and welcome to our panel. Probably you already get a picture that it's going to be a little bit more technical. The panel is organized by the Data Transparency Lab, which is an NGO we started 2 years ago together with MIT, Mozilla and the Open Data Institute. And the high-level idea was to get together people with technical expertise that would be able to build simple-to-use software tools that end users, non-computer scientists, non-privacy experts can use to understand a little bit more about what happens with their online privacy, who is leaking data, what conclusions the data collectors are drawing about the pictures, about the people and so on. And we've been working the last 2 years with several universities, with startups, with privacy interest groups, with everyone that wants to know a little bit, brings a little bit more transparency to the web to construct these tools and put them in front of the people to use it. So this is more or less the context. I will first invite Krishna Gummadi from Max Planck Institute to give his positional note.
Thanks, Nikos. Thanks, everyone. You could sort of think of my statement as a nerd's perspective or a technical perspective on this topic. The thesis of the statement that I'm going to make in the next few minutes can be summarized in a single sentence, which is that I actually believe that data mining, machine learning, big data are actually fantastic technologies that can make the world a lot more fairer and actually help us figure out when things are going wrong, rather than technologies that need to be feared in terms of things that could go wrong by using them. So the way to think about this is, imagine if you wanted to catch a criminal, you'll have to start thinking like a criminal. So if you want to solve the problem that is created by the nerds, you need the nerds to actually propose the solutions as well. So here is my take on this. So today, clearly there is a lot of fear about big corporations or even governments monitoring or gathering data about individual users through the devices or the online services that they use, and then using and analyzing this big data to figure out a lot of things about them and to impact them in various different ways. Now, we can either fear this scenario by letting our imagination run wild about all sorts of bad things that could happen, or we could think of it as from the perspective of, could we actually bring transparency to these services and to the way in which data is being used. So one position there to take is to either, as I was saying, make the worst case assumption, or trust that the companies that are actually gathering all the data would do the right thing, or we could actually audit them. And when you start thinking in terms of auditing, this is where you would again need lots of data to actually figure out what exactly are these companies doing. So this is a classic case of like reverse engineering the online services that every one of us are using today, whether it is Facebook or Twitter or Amazon or or Google or any of these kinds of services. Now, I'm going to give you 3 or 4 quick examples, depending on the time that I have, about where researchers recently have started focusing their efforts on auditing these large online services and where they have actually had impact. So the first project is something that I myself was involved in about close to 7 years ago, when there was a lot of fear about ISPs actually discriminating between traffic based on the application that was running. So there was this huge debate about network neutrality and whether ISPs would actually favor certain types of traffic, certain types of applications over other types of applications, kind of a thing. Now, about 7 years ago, we were building some tools that would enable end users to actually just figure out how well their ISP connection was working. So we built a bunch of measurement tools to do that, and we just posted them online. We just made them available on a website, and then some of these tools actually went viral, and there were hundreds of thousands of people who have actually used these tools to check on their own personal internet connections and whether ISPs were doing some sort of traffic shaping. And that data that we gathered from these hundreds of thousands of users was actually extremely useful to actually figure out which ISPs were actually shaping traffic and which weren't. And instead of just relying on rumors or hearsays, we could actually verify who were the ISPs that were actually differentiating traffic. Now, more recently, there has been a lot of effort from computer scientists in building such tools for a variety of online services, and many of them are being funded under the umbrella of the Data Transparency Lab. So one example of such an experiment was actually done by Nikolaos himself, where they looked at price discrimination. That is, whether online services are actually showing different prices to different consumers based on things like their location or based on some other personal information that they are gathering. Now, how do you detect this price discrimination? Well, a fantastic way to do this would actually be to create multiple accounts, potentially from multiple different locations, and see what sort of prices you're getting. And actually, Nikolaos showed that if you were actually accessing the service through different locations in the internet, you would actually get different pricing, right? Now, stretching this analogy further, there is a lot of interesting ways in which we could audit the services today by giving them various different types of inputs and looking at the outputs that you get, and actually mining and learning from these inputs and outputs to reverse engineer what sort of things that the services are actually doing. So in a funny way, we can actually turn these technologies of big data and data mining and machine learning on the services themselves to figure out exactly what these services are doing. In fact, I would point out that these days, these sorts of auditing techniques are being used for offline services as well, or things that we traditionally think of being offline. For instance, recently there were studies of Airbnb and the prices that were being offered to rent homes, similarly sized or similarly desirable homes or desirable rental properties for people of different races. Now, what the kind of analysis that was done there involved data mining and machine learning, where you had to account for the statistically for the similarity of the houses and and pointing out that precisely one aspect of a person's data was actually responsible for the kind of differences in the prices that were being offered and so on. And there are numerous other examples of this going on in a variety of offline world scenarios as well, including policing and recruiting and so on. Since I'm running out of time, so I guess I would summarize my statement by saying technology definitely has created potential for some problems and some problems as well. But I think rather than actually fear them or talk about them in the abstract, it would actually be good if we actually use the same technologies to actually gather data, facts, and use the evidence to see what's going right versus what's going wrong. And that's the sort of the spirit of the Data Transparency Lab, as well as several researchers who are conducting research in that space.
Thank you very much, Krishna. So to quote a little bit on what Krishna said, the high-level idea is that if you want to monitor or control or understand technology, because things have become, with big data and complex algorithms, so complex, you'll need other technologies, not something that you could do by just looking at a few numbers or asking a few questions. The complexity of some of the problems that Krishna has mentioned, like price discrimination, like discriminating based on other sensitive personal data, requires collecting huge volumes of data and processing them with very specialized algorithms and techniques in order for the information to arise. So I would now pass it to Haddadi to make the initial statement. Hamed, it's all yours.
Thanks, Nikolaos. I'll briefly talk about also the efforts from the other parts of the community. So many of the NGOs and the open source community, starting from when Mozilla, for example, browser first came in, there's been a lot of efforts on releasing tools to people to kind of give them a little bit of ability to just kind of start the privacy fight. I'm not going to label this as a fight always, because obviously there is an element of benefit that as a content publisher, somebody that's putting content on the web, they rely on the advertising, or as a game developer or something like that. So we are going to revisit the business models later. But this whole thing started with a bunch of ad extensions initially becoming available on the Mozilla browser, and then slowly there was some on Google, and then recently, actually a few weeks ago, Apple allowed ad blockers on iOS, and then immediately the most popular ad blocker got withdrawn because the person who'd actually put it up, they kind of felt as if this would be doing harm to the internet ecosystem. So I know that the conference is greatly about data protection and privacy, but we have to also kind of think about the ecosystem as a whole as well, that the way it's running, how can we encourage paid models? Because for many of the apps, like 80% of the apps on Android are actually free apps, and they are ad-driven, and there's all sorts of data that is leaking. So there's a project, for example, in Berkeley, and there's another project that is funded by DTL, actually, looking at the leakage of personal data from mobile apps. There are tons of extensions, Privacy Badger, Ghost Tree, NoScript, and a bunch of others that are looking at tracking, for example, where is your personal data going beyond just the first hop. So the first hop is always actually pretty easy. You can see that I load a page, 70 trackers load, so from like 10, 15 different domains. These are the guys that got my the first batch of data. In fact, I've heard today a lot of fight on Google and Facebook and stuff. In fact, these are the guys that you know about, and these are the, let's say, the good guys. There are thousands of cookie brokers, ad traders, ad injection mechanisms. There are tens of thousands of extensions right now active on the Chrome store, on the App Store, on the Android, that they inject ads. So instead of getting Google's ads, you're now getting some random guy's ads that you have no way of even knowing their name. Okay, you can name 2 or 3 of these guys, but we recently had a work looking at tracking these personal data the way they go. There are thousands of these companies out there, and fine, okay, now you have a legislation, you can go and chase, let's say, the good guys. But we have to think about ways of not only bringing legibility into this whole ecosystem, which is the first stage that all these trackers and extensions looking at knowing, okay, who's tracked us, where has it gone, what kind of data was inserted, let's say, instead of the ad that they initially wanted. The next, so this is the job of, let's say, if we want to call it the nerds or the techies. But the next stage, which is actually what currently left to the regulators, is agency, is what we call agency, is enabling you to do something about it. The very first example of agency that actually happened in the last decade was the right to be forgotten case in Europe. Again, the right to be forgotten, currently it's addressing one company, and there are hundreds of thousands of cases kind of filed against that company. Obviously, whatever gets omitted from that specific company's webpage is available across other websites, and there are tools that let you track very easily what has been removed from that specific company's case. But I think we need those tool makers from the NGOs, from the government organizations, from the hacktivist community, and people in the EU, let's say. I'm not going to talk so much about the US system because it's slightly different. Together to kind of enable this agency and then further on negotiability, that if because of a number of web searches that I've made, a company has made an inference that I am interested in this and that product, and based on that, they can offer this kind of specific health insurance to me because they think I have this specific disease, then what can I do about this thing now? Today, I mean, we are doing a little bit of effort. Okay, for at least with Google, you can go to their webpage and see, okay, these are the interests and this is what who they think you are. But the world is much bigger than that. And there's a bunch of tools that the community is making. But I think we need a joint effort between the policymakers and regulators and the technologists to actually not only reverse engineer this whole ecosystem, try to implement audit points into the companies in a way that you don't have to fully trust a self-regulatory system. And I think that leads to the next person.
Thank you, Hamed. So let me get now to the point of how do we get to the privacy geeks to interface with the policymakers and the regulators. A comment from my side, I got into privacy out of chance, out of curiosity. At one point I was looking at the prices for hotel rooms, and another friend through Skype was looking at the same site, and we were seeing different values. So this got me wondering. This led to the creation of some software for automatically checking for online price discrimination. Then, in a similar manner, at some point I saw a banner somewhere on a web page, and I was wondering whether I'm seeing it because I live in Barcelona, because of the time of the day, or because of something that I searched 2 weeks ago. And this has led to the creation of another auditing tool that tells you whether a website is using personal information of different types to display advertisements. And I think other people, like the academics, their PhD students, they found these topics intriguing and cool. They are very nice areas to do a PhD on if you're like artificial intelligence or large-scale measurements. But eventually, I think all of us want to contribute more tangibly to this important discussion. And it's for this reason that we want to interface with the policymakers and the regulators and basically ask, where do you see all these things fitting or helping, hopefully, in this very important public discussion? And for this, I will pass it to Karolina to give us her view on the topic.
Thank you, Nikos. So why is it useful, what you are doing? This is the question you are asking me. So very much so. You know, that was indeed very much so, and I think you will have a lot of success with your means or with your tools, selling them on the market or providing the market with it, because people and maybe enforcers, data protection authorities will be looking for it. Why? You know that we are about to change and our data protection rules in Europe. We are changing from the directive to the regulation. One of the main elements of the changes the regulation is bringing is the change from the ex ante control, notifications, authorizations to ex post. Ex post based on the one hand of an accountability of the controller of businesses. You do process my data, you are responsible for showing me, you are responsible first of all for complying with the regulation, you dear controller, and secondarily, you are responsible for demonstrating it. So this is the idea on the basis of which the regulation works. But you are responsible for it, very nice, you're accountable, the principle of accountability, but on the other hand, there are means and ways for data protection authorities, first of all, to check it, and then if you do not comply with all these rules, to punish you for it. And there are two ways of a punishment, what is more tangible than money. So, on the one hand, the regulation provides for the possibility to impose fines on businesses, on undertakings. Depending on the gravity of the breach, these fines can go to up to 4% of the annual worldwide turnover of the group and not the subsidiary. And on the other hand, we, individual users, we can claim damages and compensation in front of the national court. So this is, move from ex ante to ex post, accountability of the controller, but on the other hand, means of verifying this accountability. And obviously, your tools, the tools you are developing, will be very much will be necessary in order to prove that there was a breach. Now, what is in there in the regulation, which is incentivizing businesses also to look for your tools so as to check whether they do comply with the regulation? I mentioned accountability. Here, the controllers are first of all obliged to keep the records of what they are doing, so that data protection authority, when there will be checking what is going on, they have access to really very concrete information. Then the regulation, so as to not to block the controllers to develop new technologies, so as to stay technologically neutral, is based on two principles which are very much, as if two sides of the same coin. One is data protection by design and default, and another one is risk-based approach. So, what is this risk-based approach, which is going very much in the direction of technologic neutrality? It means, hey, controller, you can develop, but you have to ensure level of security appropriate to the risk of processing. And this is your responsibility. Yeah? So you develop, and depending on what kind of risk is involved with the processing you do, you need to adjust the security, the safeguards, so that the rights and freedoms of data subjects are not being infringed. Data protection by design and by default, it's about you, controller, while you are conceiving the product, when you are starting to think about it, do factor in data protection laws so that they do not, and rules, so that they do not come up at the end. Because you have to, the data protection rules have to cover the whole life cycle of the product. And so these are very general rules. There are very concrete means to ensure that data subjects, for example, and data protection authorities are informed. I'm just about to finish, but I wanted to say that Nico took some of my time. So there are very concrete means where obligations imposed on the controller, so that you do not need to jump in with your tools, but the controller has the obligation, for example, to inform about data breaches, which are unless there will not cause a risk for rights and obligation of data subjects. So this obligation to inform about such a data breaches unless they cause this risk for data subject within 72 hours to the DPA. And when the risk is high, even us individuals will need to be informed. And then we can take action, DPA can take action. After hearing the beep, I think I'll leave it by it.
Thank you, Karolina. Thank you very much. So I guess we heard the two extreme approaches to the issue. On the one hand, curiosity and young students wanting to do a PhD on a cool topic, and on the other side, the very serious regulatory approach. So I will ask last Cathy to give us her thoughts about what lies in between, or whatever else she thinks in the area.
Well, I'm a data scientist, so my object of interest is the algorithm itself. And I think of an algorithm as an opinion embedded in formal code. I'm not particularly interested in privacy, that's a confession, but I'm interested in how algorithms are used as tools of social control. And I want to give you a story. I interviewed a teacher from the Washington, D.C. area for a book I'm writing, who got fired because of a score she got for her teacher assessment. If you don't know about the way we hold teachers accountable, in our air quotes, in the United States, it has a lot to do with the history of political rhetoric around education. But the point I'm trying to make is that this scoring system, which is statistically flawed, is also completely unaccountable and opaque. She had no way of understanding it or questioning it, and she got fired from it. This is a great example of how the powers that be had the right to build an opinion embedded in formal code, but give no access to that opinion for the people who it was targeting. So when I think about auditing algorithms, I want, as a teacher, as a citizen, as a supporter of public servants, to be able to ferret out that opinion. If you're going to have an opinion, I need to know what it is. That's what I mean by auditing algorithms. Now, a lot of the examples we've seen are online, but I want to make the first point. I'm going to make 3 points, and then I really want this discussion to happen, and it's way too dark in here, but I'm going to go like this so you guys can raise your hands. And so the first point I want to make is that algorithms are everywhere, at least in the United States, where the data protection laws are quite terrible. And private companies have algorithms that they don't share, the proprietary algorithms, which we discussed briefly. They don't share them. They impose harm on people, and there should be tools built for regulators who currently don't see into these algorithms so that they can see into these algorithms. It's very simple. If you can think of an algorithm that imposes on other people, another example besides teachers is prisoners. There are algorithms that are used in sentencing called recidivism risk models, also not understood by anyone, really. The Justice Department doesn't really understand what happens with these models. I can talk about that in question and answer. But my point is, if we're going to impose harm on people or prison time, we should understand what we're doing. The regulators need these tools. They don't have these tools. We need to build these tools. My second point is that these tools are not rocket science. They are essentially a formal version of the sociological experiments we already see and enjoy every day. When we hear about the experiments where applications are sent to employers with similar capabilities and records but different race, and you find out that, in fact, black applicants are turned down. That is an experiment which you can do even better with an algorithm than you can do with a human process, because algorithms are formal, they're formalized. So algorithms, will not be able to lie about what they do. I mean, maybe they could be programmed to lie, but that's a different question. We already heard about that kind of thing with Airbnb. So I want you, when you think, what is an audit for an algorithm? I want you to think, it's a formal sociological experiment of the type we already understand. The third and final point I want to make is that we need different tools for different audiences. The teachers who are being assessed with these flawed statistical models, they should have access to that model in a kind of app on their phone type of way, where they get to see, what if this student had that score? What if I had fewer students? What if I had been teaching at a different school? They should be able to see the sensitivity of their score to inputs, which they currently cannot see. And one of the reasons they can't see it is because it's the flawed model is that they're very sensitive to those silly little differences in inputs. Different tools for regulators. And I want to make the final point, which is that when you talk about different tools for different audiences, the proprietariness of these models does not actually have to be, we don't have to reverse engineer these models. We don't have to understand exactly how these models work. We can treat them like black boxes and still audit them. We can see how the black box manufactures an answer differently for different people with different characteristics. We can say, does this model, this personality test to get into this job, does it exclude people with mental health disorders? Because that's illegal. So we can test this without actually understanding the model itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cathy. Okay, with this very rich background, I think, and context, I will just enumerate a number of questions that came up while preparing the panel, and then we'll open it up to discussion. So let's start with the questions. The first one, the obvious, I guess. What kind of software tools should we build? What do people really know? What do they want to know? What is our fear when it comes to privacy leakage or discrimination, right? So which tools should we be focusing on? The second one, what kind of data should we gather with these tools? At what granularity, what fidelity, how much data do we need to gather? The third one, these different software programs that we build, should we make them accessible to the end user, to the DPA? At what level of complexity can we develop and to have the maximum traction of using the output of these tools? The fourth question is, let's say that using some software technology, you start suspecting that you are being subjected to some discriminatory behavior, or that somebody got from you information that he shouldn't have gotten. How much evidence is enough in order to start your case? And how much information do you need to take it all the way to a court? What counts as evidence and what counts as proof of something? And the and the last, but I guess very important question is, in order to gather evidence about what happens around, you need to have real users using these tools and reporting either evidence or proof of what they observed online. So if we are to understand whether different online stores give us dynamically prices based on how much they think we are willing to spend, you will need to really gather a big data set to be able to make some statistically sound conclusion about whether they do this or the other thing. So getting to this level, creating this corpus of data, means that your tool needs to have a big enough user base. And getting, it's certainly non-trivial to build these technologies and this software, but actually recruiting the users, finding the people that will use them is even more difficult, and it's a big question of how we're going to achieve that. And finally, there are some additional things that come to mind. Let's say that we build this technology to audit the technology that we suspect is creating some problems. Then somebody could ask about how do we audit the technology that will be auditing the other technology, right? Because even the tools that we built to detect some privacy leakage, maybe they are wrong, right? Maybe they are not correct. I think Cathy touched upon this thing a little bit. How can we set some privacy quality standards for this software? Lots of it is coming from labs. It's not really, doesn't come with any user manual or any real guarantees. So we need to be really careful when using that. And lastly, whether it is even at all feasible to have these tools work in real time. Some of the studies that have been published in academic venues, they are kind of offline in a sense, right? You collect a lot of data, then feed it to an algorithm, and then the algorithm tells you something. But in reality, this might not have real value because the algorithm will need first 2 years of data before it can tell you something, whereas the actual thing that you are auditing is something you really need to know now. So it's a big question mark whether these things can be built for any practical purpose. So with these questions in the air, I'll open it up to anyone for a second round of comments or questions from the audience.
I have some ideas.
Okay. What should we build?
I'm a loudmouth. That was part of my CV they didn't mention. So the first thing I want to say is that we absolutely cannot leave this entirely up to individuals. It's a power issue, right? And a lot of the algorithms that I've studied specifically seek out people with low information and are on the other side of the digital divide. There's an insurance company that charges more if your score as a shopping around buyer is low. So in other words, if they determine that you don't shop around very much, they charge you more. So it specifically screws the people that don't have time, don't have sophistication to ferret out unfair practices. So we cannot only ask for tools that individuals can see whether they're being screwed. It has to, I would love to see those. And I think I think it would be very helpful, but I think at some level that has to be information that is somehow automatically sent to a different authority that can collect this as data and then do something with it on a larger level.
If I may, I mean, it's not the first area where we will have to enforce law where there is such a big, let me call it, asymmetry of information between here service providers and the users. We had it in the medical sector, architects, engineers. They were always telling us something and we just trusted that it will work. And obviously, they're always, it's not an easy thing to prove a medical case, but nevertheless, there is still means to do it. And obviously, I'm not saying, I think that our data protection regulation, on one hand, not leaving it only in the private hands, but leaving it with data protection authorities, professionals, people very much educated, which if they do not know something, then they can get experts from the outside, and data protection authorities will be equipped with quite big powers, investigative powers, corrective powers. They can, apart of imposing the fines, they can order a controller, service provider to do something very concrete. Yeah, so this is the one thing. On the other hand, here the fine stuff will come, and it's also the whole spin about the trust. I mean, it will be also losing credibility of a company. They do it once, but then consumers will just turn away from them. And by having the possibility to use data portability, they will just take their data and go to somebody else to do it. Okay, probably you'll tell me that there are areas when it's not possible to take it somewhere else, but then fines and compensation. They will go to the court and they will claim their damages. And again, going a little bit back to this asymmetry of information between service providers and data subject, the regulation provides for the possibility of data subjects to mandate body, organization, or associations which is professional, which knows what they do. Yeah? So this is really, and in the moment there is money, in the moment there will be damages claimed or fines being imposed, I think it will very much induce compliance with the law. We saw it also in other areas, competition as the first one to mention. Yeah, but so.
Just something on the tools aspect, I wanted to clarify that not everything here is necessarily also about the legal and regulatory. For example, price discrimination is a perfectly legal practice. You see it all points in the light, right? Selling a hotel to somebody in central London with an IP address from central London, or from like somewhere in a village in Scotland, it's not actually a legally binding thing.
It depends. In Europe, if you are dominant, you are not supposed to. You are not allowed to discriminate.
Again, it depends. As I mean, the airlines. You have actually tools. For example, there is a very popular tool for Amazon that you see swings of prices by tens of dollars for objects for about 10% ups and downs in a month, and actually sends you an alert, sends you an email and text if the price goes up. So what I'm trying to say is that not all these tools are necessarily about catching the criminal or something. Some of them are generally about bringing transparency into the equation, that okay, this is the deal that you're getting, and this is the deal that you would have got if you were white, or if you were in central London, or things like that. And the other thing is that sometimes these tools, and this is sometimes the help that we need from the community, is that they're a little bit sophisticated. Like, for example, how many people have an ad blocker? And this is a room full of educated people. How many people use an ad blocker? Wow, this is quite good, right? So it's about
bias sample.
Yeah, this is obvious. This is the most biased sample that you can possibly get, right? Yeah. Bunch of people sitting in a privacy conference talking about privacy, and again, it's about 50% of people. But these ad extension, ad blockers and things comes with the bells and whistles. You put it on, and then some website doesn't work and something doesn't load up, and eventually you give up on it, the cookie doesn't load and stuff like that. So for an ordinary user, they may give up on it quite quickly, or they may not even know how to configure it. So these are also some of the things to think about when we talk about tools.
I just have one other comment about the tools. One thing that often researchers who are trying to build these auditing tools run into is the same data protection regulations that are meant to prevent the companies from exploiting or treating people unfairly actually end up getting in the way of discovering whether different people are actually being treated differently. Because from the perspective of an auditing tool, if you want to discover what sort of treatment different people are getting, you would need to gather data about a large group of people, right? But of course, so actually this leads to a interesting situation where many people in the research community oftentimes cannot actually deploy the tools that they would want to get to know what's actually going on, in large part because they would be in violation of the data protection regulations. It's a kind of like a interesting tension that develops there.
I'm talking from a very European point of view. So here, I mean, all these discrimination cases will be investigated by a national competition authority, so the Commission, which is the main enforcer in Europe. And then the Commission will gather data, or the national competition authority, on the basis of law, and will then lead an investigation on the basis of law. So from I don't know which bunch of data subjects and users will take this data in order to investigate. So, I mean, I gather probably personal data on the basis of on the legal basis being law, and for the enforcement purposes. So I mean, I see a problem more on personal level, but for public enforcers, I do not see such a problem, because they will just have a law which allows them to gather data and then evaluate it, for example, in order to find discrimination. I mean, discrimination in Europe, it's something that competition authorities will investigate a little bit more, or consumer protection authorities.
So a comment and question for Karolina and the representatives of academia here. Do you think that we have enough people with enough technical expertise to really go and look into all these cases? So I can mention examples, and I'm pretty sure that Hamed and Krishna have others. So it took us a good 2 years to develop such a tool and be confident enough that what is measuring is not noise. And it took a team of 2 PhD students that almost burned out in the process, and other people that have done these things in the past. So it's a very non-trivial technical endeavor, and the number of people that can do this thing, I think, I don't know, I think probably university departments will need to change their program and start producing like massively privacy experts and security experts, because it seems that the needs of the market, I don't know if they can be met with the people that are currently on the market. What's your take on this?
I do. I mean, at least at the academic conferences, I see a lot of extremely smart people who actually debate and struggle for a number of years to produce these kinds of tools. Now, it's possible that maybe there are similar experts in the European Commission as well, but we're talking. I mean, some of these auditing tools are really state of the art in terms of reasoning about what's the minimal amount of data that you would need to gather, and what constitutes an evidence, right? So, for instance, maybe this is a bit of a too technical of a point, but sometimes suppose if you asked some company to, if the regulators went and asked some company to show some data that they could audit, right? Now, sometimes these companies would anonymize the data before they would even show the regulators, but it's only very recently some researchers in the data mining community started pointing out that these anonymization functions essentially can end up destroying the ability to detect certain types of discriminations in the data. Now, that's a very sophisticated set of results that people are arriving at very, very recently. So there are some really troubling set of constraints or certain tensions about like what data do you need to conclusively demonstrate, or what would count as like evidence, maybe from an academic perspective for what is happening?
I mean, if I understand your question correct, I mean, for me, computer scientists who will help data protection authorities or data protection enforcers to prove the case, they do not need to be data protection specialists. These are two different things, yeah? So I just will come to you and I say, somebody is alleging that something is happening. On the basis of this data, can this happen? Yeah, this is the question I will pose you. Now, this anonymization thing, I mean, the regulation spells very clearly investigative powers of supervisory authorities to obtain from the controller and the processor access to all personal data, and anonymous data, it's not personal data, and to all information necessary for the performance of its tasks. So if you, I will take you and I'll say, I need you to do this, and you will be doing it in my name or in the name of the Data Protection Authority, because the Commission is not the enforcer of data protection rules in the Europe. So this is really the task of data protection authorities. And you will be getting personal data on the basis of law. You will be just doing the job for them. So here I do not see so much the problem.
Okay. Let's go to the room. Are there questions? You, sir, can go first. There will be a mic for you.
Yes, thank you very
State
much.
your name and where you're from.
Yes. My name is José Gavilan, and I'm working for the Flemish government of Belgium. But I'm going to ask my question more as a social activist who is concerned about racial discrimination. And a problem we have in Belgium is that according to the statistics, Belgium is the one of the countries where racial discrimination for hiring workmen is the highest in Europe. But the problem, we can't demonstrate it because decision making is never explicit. So we always say this person had not a good qualification, his language is not good, and so on. There's very much blah blah blah. But in fact, the motive, in my opinion, is also a little bit racial. We don't have confidence in some kind of people with a particular origin. So my question is, do we have tools to use to combat this kind of non-explicit decision making?
Thank you for the question. Naturally, I will pass this to Krishna. Is working on combinatorial discrimination.
So the answer is actually this is precisely the scenario where big data, meaning having data from not just one case of an employment scenario, but not in the case of one individual, but having the data from a large number of individuals and large number of corporations can actually help. So recently there have been works where people are actually studying those kinds of scenarios. So this is somewhat related, it's not exactly the same, but recently there was a very popular study done by Alessandro Acquisti from CMU, where what he wanted to test was whether companies were actually using social media posts that people make in their employee hiring decisions. Of course, this is not exactly racial discrimination, but it's an example of the sort of things that you could figure out about what sort of things employers are actually doing. So the question that he was interested in is, are people actually looking at what posts people, their applicants made, and whether they're using the posts to actually judge certain applicants as more risky than others. So what he did was he actually created several hundreds to thousands of applications. And of course, he sent them to different companies, and for each one of those applications, these are they're not actually corresponding to real users, but they made different types of social media posts. And he saw statistically in large numbers of those applications whether people who were posting certain types of things on social media were being had a lower chance of being asked for an interview or getting a job. Actually, in this particular case, it was just about being asked for an interview than others. So the short answer is when you have large amounts of data, if you apply the right statistical analysis techniques, you should be able to demonstrate it. And this is an example of where big data can actually come to help.
I just have to jump in as a data scientist and mention that is not big data. that it's old-fashioned social sciences.
Yeah.
At a big scale.
At a
big
different
scale.
scale.
It doesn't, thousands
Maybe-
of
Yeah.
data sets, data points
And-
is not big data.
No, I mean, one of the powers of these things is that we can quickly multiply it by 100,000. Like
Yeah, we
Latanya Sweeney's paper on ad discrimination based
Well,
on the
that's-
names, that
okay,
was
so
a good
that's what I was
example
going to mention.
again.
That, like, in fact, Latanya Sweeney's examples right here on my.
Mhm.
We can audit algorithms much more finely than we
Exactly.
could audit the process that you described. So, in some sense, if we want to be optimistic, we should think big data algorithms they're big, but they are infinitely auditable compared to human processes, where you'd actually have to say, could you go find the records of paper applications and hand them to us? And it would be a pain in the ass to analyze.
Maybe also as a Belgian, I need to react to this. It's true that there were some cases in the past whereby some interim agencies used not even algorithms, but just in the free text, some codes in which they made preferences from the employer clearly. But I think that's in most cases, when it surfaces, it might be people, but usually it's also whistleblowers who say, I was there and this is not ethically correct, and that's why and that's also where most cases will appear to the surface is by whistleblowers. 80% of these cases surfaces by these kind of people, not by auditors or a regulator by default.
Yes, but this is actually, I think, Mark, is the easy case. I mean, if you go and you audit the source code of a program that decides on whether some e-commerce site will send you a product or will deny selling you the product because they believe that you have a stolen credit card, you can look at the code, and if you find such a clause, there will be an if statement that will be discriminatory, basically saying that if these people come from these parts of the town or if they come from this country, say that you're out of stock, right? This is the easy case. The most complex case is when there is no explicit rule of discrimination within the code, but the algorithm, by learning from the data, ends up becoming discriminatory. So it's very easy to have any kind of artificial intelligence algorithm that eventually will realize that there is a higher percentage of fraud when a request comes from this part of the city or from this country as opposed to the other country. So naturally, the program will assign a higher risk in this area and will deny a transaction. So in the end, somebody that is a legitimate customer and that happens to live in this place will be discriminated without having any explicit kind of discrimination being in the program. And then showing this thing, you cannot even, even if you audit the code, the discriminatory clause is not there.
Well, if you audit it, first of all, it's important to know if you're looking at the right algorithm, because they might have changed it in the meantime. And secondly, data changes also over time, and program codes also change over time. So it's very, very hard to really find the right code that they used, because with DevOps, for example, they change the code every day, literally. So how to log that and how to audit that? Any penny for toss. I don't know, from a data science point of view, what's more important, the algorithm to audit or easier than the data, in your opinion, Cathy?
I just want to, I want to agree that there's no procedure says now be discriminatory. It's never like that. And that's why it almost never makes sense to look at source code. That we treat it like a black box. You're right, it could change over time. And if it does change for the better, then we're done.
Yeah.
That's not what happens.
No. Other questions? There in the people standing up. He was first. Sorry.
I'm Anderson Santana from a researcher at SAP. And since 3 years, we are working the A4 Cloud project, which is about enforcing accountability or promoting accountability in the cloud. We developed a number of tools, we prototype tools for accountability enforcement, for instance, that are capable of automatically executing data protection obligations. We have a second tool called Transparency Log, which is able to log events related to personal data protection using crypto mechanisms with which only the data subject could see what happened to his data in the audit that, investigate what processing was made to his data. There is another tool called Data Tracker. The user can visualize what happened to the data and so on. So if you are interested, please contact us and see the website, a4cloud.eu. And my question for you is, we have built over a number of years of research, and we have developed prototypes, you as well, you academic people, and we are missing one point, the adoption step. So what are the barriers for the data controllers to start adopting this technology and for going from research prototypes to pilots and actually to products.
Thanks for that commercial pitch. Okay, who wants to pick that up?
I don't think it has to be commercial, but even free and open source tools, even those are difficult to get the users.
I'll throw in that I think companies that are using algorithms should be auditing the algorithms they use, which are often licensing agreements with third-party companies.
Yep.
But they just believe in data right now. I think it's just a matter of time. They're going to get sued.
Yep.
They're going to realize there's liability risk, especially if they're Fortune 500 kind of companies.
Yep.
And then they're going to pay for this.
Okay.
Users?
Question here in the second row.
Yeah, so you were talking about tools.
First, who are you and
sorry, I'm Sébastien Gam from University of Quebec at Montreal.
Yep.
I had a question about, so you are talking about tools to understand the algorithm, but is there already tools also to game with the algorithm? So for price discrimination, does it exist tools that allow you to change your profile and the second question is, if there is no transparency for the algorithm, is there a kind of right to lie and to change my profile if the algorithm is not fair with me and is not telling me what it's doing? Do I have some right to lie to this algorithm?
Yeah, I get your point. There are quite a few tools for example, injecting randomness to your profile for gaming the ads, or for example, and the community has been playing a lot with these things, but somehow they've not made it in the wild yet. Sometimes because of the mathematical complexity behind them, sometimes because the user doesn't see the benefit in them. For example, as a user, as a no ordinary user, I might not see the benefit of, for example, injecting fake ads and doing fake Google search queries in order to mess up my profile and things like that, because then obviously that also deteriorates the quality of the organic responses that you get when you do a Google search, for example. So
I think it's a brilliant idea. In fact, I've heard recently one researcher, Pedro Domingos from University of Washington, who was actually suggesting that we should think about we could possibly think about this kind of a thing in a very different way. You think of your online personas as, I mean, there is nothing that prevents you from having multiple online personas. They're just your identities, right? Like you can have multiple online identities. And so why not think of this whole problem as creating different identities, and then when you're using a service, you use the identity that gets you the best benefit from the service, kind of thing. Now, of course, I mean, there is nothing. I don't know whether it's legal. I would think that it is legal because I would presume that you're allowed to have multiple online identities, and there's and so it's actually a very interesting way of thinking about the problem. That actually upends some of the assumptions that we always make, where we automatically tie our offline identity very strongly with a single online identity.
I just want to jump in and say that I very much encourage people to try this, but you know, most of the data that's like Google gets everything, right? And Google also makes it difficult to get a lot of different Gmail addresses. So there's, you know, and if Google makes it hard, it's hard. So there's just a lot of obstacles to making that work on a large basis.
I was just checking today on like money.com, very generic money advice website. What's their advice for battling price discrimination? And they have some set of very simple things that ordinary people can do. Clear your cookies, clear your cache, which is really good, and it works. So it's a naive and baseline level of what Krishna was just describing. Obviously, asking for an ordinary user to manage a number of online personas, automatically it's easy. You can automate it. And this is the beauty of having these tools, because maybe I can install an extension from from EFF, from the EU, from a well-known thing that just generates 100 personas for me, and in 100 different tabs does price searches for the blender that I want to buy, and see, okay, what cheaper health insurance, well, not health insurance because that's a bit tricky. What blender am I buying?
Well, I think the right to lie happens already on dating sites, but okay. Next question in the back. There's a person, yeah.
too many issues, I guess.
That person has been
Too many
raising
issues
her
to
hand
talk about, but
everything.
the tools you were just describing in your last intervention are basically either already available or in the pipeline in research in the university. Most probably, and that's basically the question for you all, we are still talking in terms of personal profiles, while most of the analytics, or at least a large number of the analytics, really don't care that my name is Giovanni Glandè, sorry, I forgot to say from Pisa. They don't care what is my name, what is my actual age, or my profession, and so on and so forth. Insofar, what they are interested is the data they are gathering for the specific target. And they don't need to gather them from my profile on LinkedIn or whatever it is. They will get most of the data from my objects. The objects are somehow related to me. So this goes to three sub-questions, if I can. First, the actual European legal framework and the forthcoming framework, I'm not entirely sure that fully address this feature, which is not future, it's almost the past already. Second, in technical terms, I'm afraid that sooner or later people will be sued. I'm afraid it may be too late in sooner or later, unless there is a coordinated effort in first knowing what is going on, finding the evidence, and bringing the lawsuits in an integrated manner. Let me explain why.
No, but please, we don't have time to do that.
Yeah.
Please, sorry.
Sorry for the question, but that's the two issues I think are rather important. The
Okay.
legal framework and
Yeah. Can you pass your question to the lady next to you? Yeah.
Are you collecting questions?
Yeah.
Hello? Yes. Hi, my name is Paula Bielski, and I'm an ethnographer at the Center for Digital Cultures in Lüneburg, that's near Hamburg. And I study the affective dimensions of technologists working with personal data. And I just have two comments. Maybe the last one is a bit of a question. So speaking from somebody who's not a data scientist, I just really want to echo what Catherine said. I think a lot of stuff that you said is totally awesome. And I think I would say that perhaps it's time that we think of algorithms as any other infrastructure. And it helps me to think of an algorithm as an infrastructure that enables or affords action. So I guess we don't really need to know what a bridge engineer does in building bridge suspensions, but we sort of know how a bridge works by now, right? So I think it's finally time that we kind of understand an algorithm, but not fully in kind of this not black box, but sort of a gray box. And another thing I want to say that in my work, one of the biggest things that I do that happened when I spoke to various technologists from large companies to small companies was how powerless programmers feel. And even the part-time activist Cypherpunk who works at a big company doesn't feel that she has the power to speak out against her company when they do something wrong. And I think that it would be interesting to think of a tool, or perhaps there is a tool out there, that could help listen to programmers who feel disempowered to be part of the fair practices in their company. So I just wondered if there is a tool and kind of like a secure drop whistleblowing tool that they can speak in from the inside, and when they see that kind of shit's going down. Yeah. So
well, it's called WikiLeaks and Tor.
No, I know, but but that doesn't. WikiLeaks and Tor, it doesn't talk to that manager who does something, and it's smaller than that. That's what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of time thinking about what an ethical data scientist would do. But I've been in a company, a startup, where I had to sit and listen to a 2-hour explanation of why we weren't going to honor do not track, and why it's actually good for the customer. They just don't understand it. So I totally agree. It's a good idea. I mean, the STEM Feminist comes to mind, which is a place where people anonymously write about sexist experiences they had in STEM fields. I'm a mathematician, so I read that sometimes. It's a good idea. And it's obviously not enough, but nothing's by itself enough. There's a Hippocratic oath for modelers, which is great, but it assumes that you have power. And within a Facebook context, I don't know how much power a data scientist actually has.
While Krishna thinks about the deeper answer to this question and the previous question, because he always has the good deep answer, I have the very simple shallow. I have the shallow because I was one of his students. I am actually, that was the view 5 years ago when you said I don't care about the person and they don't care about the person. No, in reality today, because 5 years ago I didn't have a server powerful enough, but now I do. I want to see what you eat, where you go, what you do, what are your interests, what do you do on your mobile, how can I link your mobile and your browser and your tracking device, all of them together, in order to discriminate you by $2. And the cost of doing that for me is 10 cents in terms of energy. So it's peanuts. So I'm going to do it by all means. Few years ago that was the case, but today it's changed. I think the world is changing in a very fast manner, and obviously the next phase is with more and more devices on IoT, it will be even more. There you go. That was my shallow answer.
Okay, we're closing into the last minutes of this session. Well, I think if I can wrap up a little bit, what I've heard and I really liked is the asymmetry between service provider and users is definitely never been that big. The question, who will control the controllers, is definitely a question we should wonder about. I really loved also the discussion on the algorithm, the force of the algorithm, but also the force of the data, and the balance between trust in and value from. How can you trust something that it works well, but also the driver of value is very important. But also one thing that struck my mind in this discussion was also, do we have enough people to manage all this, meaning to audit this, to have the science, to the capabilities, the competence and the skills to do this kind of work. And for me, one thing comes back is transparency. And I think that's also where a lot of work will need to be done. I also heard some nice items for another PhD student, so I think it will be interesting to see how that will work. So I'd like to thank the panel. Is there maybe one quote or one sentence that you would be finishing if they say this is the most important thing in terms of the title, the monitoring and enforcing privacy laws and data protection?
I'm just going to say that in 30 years, this auditing algorithms is going to be an academic field. It's going to have conferences this big. This is, as our world becomes more and more automated, so will the audits of that world. So we definitely don't have enough people working on this, but I hope we will.
Okay, good. Karolina, you have a quote?
I do agree. I think the market will create it. I mean, the need is, therefore, there are financial incentives to have them, so it will come.
Okay. Hamed, you have a quote to finish off?
I just don't know if self-regulation is enough.
Okay, good.
But that's all.
Like that, Krishna?
I think we have had fantastic quotes. I think I shouldn't ruin it.
Nikolaos, you have one?
Well, I just want to thank the panelists and the audience and you, Marc, and I think we have enough of things to think.
Thank you very much.